Welcome to the Behind the Shield podcast. As always, my name's James Gearing, and this week it is my absolute honor to welcome on the show Marine Raider veteran, the man behind Joe Malone Training, and a member of All-American Leadership, Joe Malone. So in this conversation, we discuss a host of topics, from his journey into the military, entering MARSOC, his deployments in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria, the transition out of the military, weapons training, leadership, his own powerful mental health story, and so much more. Now, before we get to this incredible conversation, as I say every week, please just take a moment. Go to whichever app you listen to this on, subscribe to the show, leave feedback, and leave a rating. Every single 5-star rating truly does elevate this podcast, therefore making it easier for others to find. And this is a free library of well over 1,100 episodes now. So all I ask in return is that you help share these incredible men and women's stories so I can get them to every single person on planet Earth who needs to hear them. So with that being said, I introduce to you Joe Malone. Enjoy. Well, Joe, I want to start by saying two things. Firstly, thank you to our mutual friend, Rick Rochelle, for making this connection. And secondly, I want to welcome you onto the Behind the Shield podcast today.
Thank you very much, man. It's honorable. It's an honor to be here.
So where on planet Earth are we finding you this afternoon?
I'm outside of Chicago, about 40 minutes into the suburbs, Illinois. So that's where I'm at.
Well, let's start at the very beginning of your journey then. So tell me where you were born and tell me a little bit about your family dynamic, what your parents did, how many siblings.
I was born in the city, raised right on the outside of it. Super interesting little town. The mafia history there is so rich. If you ever have the opportunity to read a book called Double Deal, it was written by our former police chief, and he spills it all, man. All the info about the Chicago Mafia during that period in time. So really interesting town when it comes to that. Siblings, brother's 3 years younger than me. My sister's 3 years younger than him, so 6 years total. From myself as the oldest, and then my mom and dad, very different. How those two ended up meeting, I don't know, but very opposite ends of the spectrum. My mother was is a very adventurous heart. She was raised on a cattle farm out in Michigan, left home at an early age, and then my dad was raised further in the city in the old Irish firefighter neighborhoods, which are kind of different these days, but that's where he was raised at, was on the south side of the city.
Beautiful. And what did he do for a living?
When they met, he was working at the airlines. He's like the guy on the runway with the sticks. When I found that out, I used to think that was like so cool. I was like a little kid, and I think my mom told me that one. But he ended up working for the FDIC, so the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. So he's a very conservative personality, and I don't mean that in terms of like politics. I just mean, he's very risk adverse, very by the book, and he's got his reasons for being that way.
Conversely, what was your mom doing, and what was her personality?
She was working at the airlines as well as a ticket counter agent. And it's kind of funny. I tell people these stories. I don't know why I was at the airport so much as a little kid. I was having a conversation with a gentleman last week when I was actually leaving Florida at the airport about that. And he was saying, he's like, yeah, there used to be a lot more bring your kid to work, like programs and days. And so I guess it makes sense as to why I was always there. But I just remember always seeing her getting yelled at the ticket counter by people. And then that's always stuck with me, to how to treat people at the ticket counter of airports and airlines with an immense amount of patience and kindness and respect, because I just never understood why somebody would be so mad at my mom when she's not the one canceling the flights. But she got laid off after 9/11 and just has done a bunch of odd jobs ever since then. She worked for Hershey for a little bit, which was kind of funny because when she would bring the candy bars that were they weren't expired, but they lost their shelf life. This was when I was in my drug phase, and I would actually take the candy bars and I would offer people bags of weed and then add a free candy bar. And so I'd be like, "Hey man, you buy some drugs, and I'll give you some free candy." And that was a pretty lucrative business for quite some time. And but anyway, she was very adventurous, always trying new things. Preaching curiosity, and yeah, she's a wild heart, I think.
What if you've had any of these conversations at all? Are there perspectives on airlines these days versus pre 9/11? Because even as a passenger, I first flew to America in 94, and watching the change, especially around COVID, oh my God, going from from being the customer is always right to being judged for 8 hours by a surly mask wearing steward or stewardess. It's been interesting to see what was a really beautiful experience kind of be picked apart probably from the corporate side to where we are today.
That's a great question. I used to love travel. I used to love taking the airplane, going new places, seeing different airports, smells, sounds, sights. I can't stand it anymore. And I think what you just mentioned right there, the transformation of the entire process. You know, I wrote the chief of security for American Airlines a couple years ago. Just I got a hold of his email and I said, you know what? I had two incidents on planes, medical incidents, and none of the staff were adequately trained. None of the staff were adequately trained for violence incidents as we were seeing the rise in it all. And I laid out a diagram for him to show the flying experience for the user and how you start out already super stressed because you got to get to the airport and do the logistics with the cab, or you're driving, then you got to pay a bunch of money for stupid parking, and then you make it in and you're hoping you get there on time and the line's not super long, and then you're going to miss your flight. Like, there's already such a high level of stress that just gets exacerbated as you go through TSA for stealing all your toiletries and never stopping they've never stopped a single terrorist attack. Isn't that insane? Like, why do we have these people who have a 90, it's like a 98% failure rate according to the inspector general? Anyways, that's the security side of me coming out. But I explained that to him and I was like, flying sucks and you're going to see a continuance of violent incidents. And he wrote me back, which I was surprised. And then just, we never really went anywhere with it, although I tried to pitch him on the idea of me training. But my dad wouldn't talk about it. He doesn't probably care much. But my mom has said many times before that people were pretty bad back then. And it's definitely just, it's evidently a lot worse. And yeah, I feel for people who are in those service positions just getting bashed on all day.
I actually worked a cardiac arrest. It's probably almost been 2 years now. We were literally on the airport tarmac in Heathrow Airport. I was on my way home back here. And the last passenger keeled over on the way to his seat. And conversely, like a few years, I think it was years before, I'd had a medical incident. It was one of those ones where they ask, is there a doctor on the plane? The nurses, and just the people that responded in that particular one. I don't know what they were doctors in, but it wasn't emergency medicine. And I'm not saying that to be snide. It just clearly they didn't know how to actually work with a patient like that. And that one, I had all the gear given to us straight away. Full ALS, cardiac drugs and, defibrillators, really? The whole thing. This most recent one, though, these poor people at Virgin, they had to ask permission for every single piece of equipment. So initially, all we had was nothing, and then an AED, and then an oxygen tank that only went up to 5 liters per minute. And, it was just clearly that they hadn't really interacted with the EMS side to make it, as you said, a stressed group of passengers that now have to be, good Samaritans, set them up for success. So I got to see both sides. One I thought was really well equipped, and then boom, I had an entire ALS equipment around me. The other one, we're working this dude for 20, 30 minutes, and then bit by bit these pieces are becoming available. And then even the impact on those staff, what was the protocol when they work a cardiac arrest on the plane? Can they go home? Do they you know what I mean? So it was really interesting as a paramedic getting that perspective and seeing in one side, I would argue, done pretty well. And another company that I respect, which is Virgin, it's a great company, but that area, and the same as you, I reached out to them and said, hey, this is how amazing your people were. I want to let you know that. If you need any advice on how to set people on the plane up for success, I'm more than happy to kind of share my information. And I never heard back. So, it is what it is.
It's so crazy that you say that. So I'm never able to have these conversations with people, right? Because how many people come across these incidents, let alone like two of them, unless, you're somebody with, it's like the same thing. Obviously, I'm, EMT trained, but I've done a lot of advanced training courses in the special forces. But like when they came out with the call, are there any nurses or doctors or paramedics on the aircraft? I actually put my head back down and was going back to sleep because I thought to myself, surely somebody here is more trained than me. Like there's got to be like a nurse or something. No, not on the first plane. Nobody was there. Dude basically just got a super low blood sugar, went unconscious, but he was a very big dude. Same process that we needed to get assistance for everything. When I cracked open the oxygen tank, they were like, oh my God, no, we're supposed to call and get permission to do that. And I was like, yeah, it's an oxygen tank. I'm sure you guys will be fine. And they, of course, as you're passing over the airports, now they have to keep handing you off to different physicians in different airports and different stations, which really just convoluted the entire process. I mean, what a pain in the ass it was to have to re-explain everything constantly. Like, I won't dive any further into it than that, but the second one, when you talk about what kind of doctors they were, man, I'm so glad this nurse, she was a brand new nurse working in the ER trauma somewhere. It was a flight from like Seattle to Canada or something, or no, Texas to Seattle. And Ukrainian refugee, leaving Ukraine. This was about 2 years ago. It was like a fresh refugee. Him and his wife are in their 70s, not a lick of English. Goes into cardiac arrest. They call for somebody to come help. I go back there. I could just see he's diaphoretic. I mean, he's just took his pulse. It was down in like the low 40s. I was like, oh my God. So we get him in the back. I asked for some equipment. They're getting permission again, having to take their time. I get the AED. We hook them up. That nurse was awesome. This lady comes up claiming to be a doctor. I don't know if she was like a psychologist or something, but she clearly has never dealt like she like screaming in my ear, I'm a doctor. I was like, we had to use Google Translate on somebody's phone and the crappy Wi-Fi on the airplane to communicate with his wife, because she had all these medications pouring out of her purse that were in like Ukrainian and Turkish, and it was pretty chaotic, man. But those flight attendants, they did awesome. I told them, I was like, look, you guys have to divert this plane or this guy's probably going to die. There's nothing I could do for him. And the doctor on the phone in the airport, and you could cut this part out if you want or not, if it gets you cut off or whatever, Delta Airlines. So I don't care. Like, screw that, because they tried telling me, well, we're not going to divert the aircraft. Just keep working on them until you get there. And I was like, we got like 3 hours to go. This dude's pulse rate is going down and down. And I had to talk to the captain. He came to the back and I was like, look, dude, I'm letting you know this guy will die. I can't do anything for this guy. This AED will give him some shocks. But how long are we going to be able to last doing CPR? I can tell you, not no 3 hours. And yeah, they ended up diverting the plane finally, and ended up, I got a phone call back from his daughter. Both of their daughters, actually, from both incidents, ended up reaching out to me a couple months later and told me that their dads were all doing fine. So that was good.
Amazing. I've told this story a few times about the cardiac arrest on the plane. The one that I had, the other one was kind of like a vagal incident. So after we did the full workout, checked his blood sugar and everything, it was really just, low BP. And I sat with him the rest of the flight. But the other one was on the tarmac. So we didn't have that medical director issue because it stayed in London. But over and over and over again, like, I'm just the grim reaper, and when there's a cardiac arrest, sadly they never make it. But you hear about this person had chest pain and there was a group of cardiologists and they're all on the plane on the way home. It was like no one else had EMS experience, and we worked this guy and arguably did everything right with what we could at that point, and he's we still lost him. But this is the thing. When is there a doctor? Is there a nurse? People need to understand that it could be a doctor of chiropody or podiatrist or whatever it is that doesn't work with this area, and it might be an EMT or a paramedic that actually is the most highly trained for that person at that time.
Yeah, and that goes. That's a shout out to first responders, because I know you have a lot of them that watch this stuff, and you guys, I work doing the leadership training with so many fire departments. Stop selling your damn shelves short. You guys make a massive impact, even if you get the frequent flyers and the stupid calls and everything that pisses you off throughout the day. The fact that you guys are just, man, dedicating your life to helping somebody in the worst moment of theirs. I mean, that's just huge. So, a huge kudos to all the first responders who do that stuff.
Absolutely. Well, going back to your kind of your childhood then, as you were in the school ages, what were you playing and doing as far as exercise and sports?
Exercise and sports. My dad wanted me to get into baseball. I was the kid who sat in right field and like pulled grass. And then I got good at catching the ball because I wasn't afraid to get hit with it. So I was a catcher for like, the last couple of years. And then I wasn't afraid to get hit with it because I got hit with it so many times, so violently in my first couple of years, line drives to the face. And then as I entered junior high, I got more into football. But then that's also when I was getting into drugs and stuff. And so we spent a lot of times walking around the woods as kids. Right on the cusp of the city where we're at is where all the forest preserves start. That's why it has such a heavy mafia history and influence. That's where they would get away with the crimes. And that's what we did. Walked around the woods and ultimately dropped out of the sports and started doing heavy drugs.
So when you reflect back now with this kind of mature lens that you have, what, if any, elements of your upbringing contributed to you leaning into drugs in the first place?
It's a good question. I had a conversation about this pretty recently as to why. And if I try to distill it as much as I possibly can, which I've probably done more in the last few months than ever in my life, it may have just been girls that were hanging out with what I now, would call pedophiles, 50-year-old guys who are buying little kids booze to get them drunk and stoned, and here's some coke and here's some crack and methamphetamine. Like before you know it, things just spiral so crazy out of control because you think that's cool. Because here's somebody in the same age bracket as your parents who are always telling you one thing, and of course you want to rebel against that. And then here's another parently figure who's confirming the biases that you have towards your own parents and rebelling against it because, yeah, this is the way to go. And of course, you can't just take a step back and see maybe this person living in this shit shack of an apartment with needles all over the place and a woman smoking crack, breastfeeding a baby isn't the best place. And when you look at your parents, because my parents raised me in a really well environment, nice middle class home. And maybe perhaps that's a key sign, an indicator that I should be listening to them a little bit more. So ultimately, that's what it was, I think.
When you were going through the school ages, what about career aspirations? What were you dreaming of becoming back then?
I want to be a musician. I learned how to play music at a very early age, and Elton John was like my first jam. So the diversity of his music and his flow and feng shui, and that also had a lot of cultural implications on me as well as like a as a child learning about homosexuality. I never really cared. I didn't understand it, but I was just kind of like, all right, whatever, not for me, but for some reason, everybody who I talked to about Elton John made a big deal about it. But I loved his music. I thought his charisma was awesome. Still do to this day. And then it turned more into like heavy rock. I learned how to play guitar. I learned how to play trumpet when I was very young. I used to compete in these state competitions, and then I learned guitar with my buddy Justin on the front stoop of his crappy apartment complex. Super poor family, man. Just crappy apartment complex full of a bunch of alcoholics and drunks and drug addicts. But his mom's old boyfriend, Russ, who was a former real hippie, like straight flower child from the 60s, taught us how to play nylon string acoustic. And from there, it just stuck with me for a very long time and was very developmental in terms of like my personality and stuff.
It's funny what you said about Elton John, because when we're young, when you meet whoever, you meet a baseball coach, the first question isn't, well, who do you sleep with? Is it a man or a woman? And now you would think that was the most important thing. Maybe not now, but up to about a year ago, you'd think that was the most primary thing. Who do you worship? Who do you sleep with? And it's that people just didn't care. It wasn't that we didn't, include them in our community at all, but it just wasn't front and center. You are Steve, you are, Jill, you are whoever, and your sexuality and your religion and your skin color is irrelevant. It's like, who are you? Are you a good person or are you a shitty person?
100%. And that's something, man, being as vocal about when I talk about things, people see me now, and there's a lot of presumptions made about me. But what they don't know is who I was and why I ended up changing. And if you were to take two pictures, I mean, it's complete opposite personas. One's a drug addict, hippie, anarchist, screw the establishment and everything. And, all this other stuff is, just what matters. And then nowadays, complete opposite demographic. And so when I talk about things like homosexuality or transsexuals or racial things, it's just so insane, the responses that I get back from people, because they think that I'm coming from some one-sided perspective, when the reality of it is that I've been through all of these things. I used to go to a hippie house where there was like 15 adult hippies living in that place, and there were nights where everybody in there was on a multitude of drugs, with a jello wrestling pudding ring tub in the basement, and I mean, just like, it's just crazy shit. And people would try to have these conversations about sensitive topics with me, and I just say pretty much the same thing. I go, I don't care, and anything I say is never negatively driven towards anybody. I just speak how I speak based off those life experiences, and I'm still going to love and appreciate people the way that I love and appreciate them, regardless of whatever. Just keep kids out of it. That's like the big thing for me, but story for another time.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny. I just saw, I'm going to post it probably today, Stephen Fry. I think it was at some sort of debate, but he was talking about political correctness and how he hates it, and it's simply because it doesn't work. He said, "I, like everyone, he's gay himself. Want all this, nastiness to be gone in the world, whether it's racism or homophobia or all the things." But he said, "But political correctness just doesn't work. That's why I don't like it." And it's true. If you stigmatize everything and you can't talk about this, and you've got to use kid gloves with this, you're not going to be able to smash yourself into the root cause of the problem. Which, ironically, I would argue that most hatred comes from mental ill health, from broken people. And I mean, we were broken compassionately and empathetically. When you grow up in a household of hatred, you're going to breed hate. Kids that have the same hate in their heart.
Yeah.
So we don't stigmatize these words. You go and you figure out how to heal communities, and I guarantee you'll see hate all but diminish then.
Yeah, I very much agree. And the more that you put labels on things, the more it ostracizes and polarizes things as well.
100%. Well, walk me through then kind of the downward spiral, because you've talked about addiction several times now. What was the initial interaction with drugs, and then where did that lead you? Where was your lowest point?
First time I ever got drunk, if you want to include alcohol, super young. I think I was like 9 years old. Drank a bunch of gin, and I've never drank gin since. Never since I was 9 years old have I touched that shit. A few years later, cousins up in the country drinking beer and eating dip. I like ate dip. I've never dipped ever since that time. I was about like maybe 10 or 11. And then the weed smoking started. I was 12 years old, which when I look at a 12-year-old these days, it's just crushes my heart to think of myself as an ignorant 12-year-old. A couple of buddies had it. We went underneath the local bridge. We smoked, and that became our hangout spot for the next, I don't know, like 6 years underneath the bridge. We called it the J spot. And it was like a viaduct with a train track. Did that for a little bit, and that led into things like mushrooms and acid, really more of a peace, love, hippie perspective. And then started getting more into drinking in high school. That led to some coke. And then from coke, the first time that I ever did heroin, it was kind of accidental. I didn't have a license till I was 18, so I had to borrow a car from one of my hippie buddies' girlfriends to drive to the city with this guy, Dwayne, who was like in his 40s. And honestly, as shitty of an influence as Dwayne was, he had a great heart, and he looked out for me as much as he didn't, if that makes sense. But go out to the city to buy him some weed, and we're in the west side. We're in the south side where this guy's from. It's dangerous ass places where I've been involved in multiple shootings in parking lots where I was sitting there waiting for drugs to get picked up. Shots start going off. People are driving. Stories for another time. But it was very dangerous in terms of where we were going. So we go down there. He would get out of the car. I would drive around the block a couple times. Then I'd see him on the road, pick him up. We'd head out. And he goes, Joe, they didn't have any weed. And I was like, all right. And he goes, that's pretty lame. And he goes, can I be honest with you? And I was like, of course. And he goes, I didn't come down here to buy weed. I came down here to get some dope. And to me, dope meant cocaine, but he meant heroin. And I was like, cool, man. I've done a bunch of coke. He goes, no, it's heroin. I was like, oh, shit. All right. He goes, do you want some? I was like, sure. Puts it on a CD. I think it was actually even a Nirvana CD cover. Drew me out a small line. And as I'm driving, I snorted it. And he's like, don't worry. We're almost home. It'll really start to hit once we get home. And I remember hitting the exit for where we were going and it really starting to sink in. And I was like, whoa, I don't know if I'm good to be driving. And then fortunately the house was like 2 minutes off the exit. We get there and I just remember feeling nauseous, but high, but nauseous, but good. And we went inside, the party's going on all around me and I got violently ill. I got sick. And that wasn't even from the come down. It was just from the drug itself. It's poison. And that just led to many, many weeks and months and a couple of years of increasing in its usage. Some of the other guys who I went to high school with on the other end of town, if you will, hung out in different groups. They were also simultaneously being exposed to the same stuff in a different road, a different pathway. And then at some point our roads kind of reconnected, which just further made it fueled it all. And to the point where now we're sticking needles in the arm and breaking into people's sheds and garages and shit, stealing power tools and really going down a path of no return. And a lot of them are dead and a lot of them are still in, all of them are either dead, in prison, or still using, except for maybe one or two others that eventually stopped.
When you look back, knowing that a lot of addiction again is filling a void. I mean, you had the Johann Hari says the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety, is connection. And so, having that kind of healed soul usually is the enemy of addiction. A lot of the people that you hung out with, when you think about their upbringing, did you see a kind of similar trauma to this group that you were surrounded that lent so heavily into heroin?
I didn't for a really long time because all my friends in this group had very rough childhoods. I by far had the top three most loving and comfortable childhoods out of the 50 people that I would hang out with. Let's just say 50 people. Everybody had really fucking hard childhoods. Abusive, drunken fathers, no fathers, mother left them and abandoned them, no money, mustard and Milwaukee's Best, only things in the fridge, 9 times out of 10. Just hard lives. And I was, quite frankly, a pussy, didn't belong there. It was just, why would I end up down this road other than for the purpose of seeking it for my own self-destruction? And looking back, I would say it has something to do with fatherly love and connection, or love and connection lost of a parent or desiring that of a parent. And I think that that's a pretty big one. That stems from my dad, where he just never, I didn't even think my dad loved me until 2018, something like that. At the absolute lowest point of me ever thinking that he liked me, loved me, I literally was convinced that he just fucking hated my guts and wouldn't come to my funeral because he was just so... It's not even like he avoided me. It's not that he said bad things to me anymore, but it was more or less just like I was a person, like a distant relative in his home that was just bothering him because I took up a resource for the day or his time, or he had, like, it's just very strange. I realized that he does love me in the way that he knows how to love somebody, and that's in the way that he was taught by his own father. And that was a very different philosophy than what I use as a father. But it's life. It's complicated at times, and relationships and emotions are a difficult thing. And so that's, I think, really what the key common denominator was, is that we all were trying to seek some love that we didn't have approval of or possession of from a parent specifically.
It's been interesting. I mean, I've done over 1,100 episodes now, and a lot of people, have similar kind of childhoods, but the trauma is different. I've had, a boy soldier from Sierra Leone whose parents were killed and he was forced into killing, and genuinely forced, like be executed or kill for us. And then they use drugs to kind of, zombify those young men, all the way through to, one of my wife's friend's husband, who kind of like you was a middle child, kind of felt unseen, felt unloved. And that was enough to send him down, the similar kind of path, actually. And so this is the danger, is when you compare trauma, like everyone's, experience is different. But if you don't feel safe and you don't feel loved and you don't feel seen as a young person, it is going to have an impact. And this is why it's so important not to even talk just about our childhood, but even our parents' childhood and our grandparents' childhood. Yeah. You start to see these dominoes. The book I wrote last year talks about this. It's a fiction, but it's storytelling this very concept. And then you look at the impact of especially OxyContin and the opioid crisis that we have now, where the real epicenters were where American industry had disappeared. Mining towns, steel towns, car industry, all these areas. And it wasn't so much the drug, it was the kind of pain that had been put into the communities by a lot of these impacts from, again, corporations and other areas. So when we really start hearing over and over again these kind of stories, well, that's great. Now you've identified some issues that we can start talking about and addressing. And our generation, yours and mine, and you're younger than me, but now as parents, we can do the work on ourselves and stop these dominoes from then falling on our kids and on our grandkids. But if we're not having these kind of courageously vulnerable conversations, we're never going to get to the root cause. And exactly like you've underlined, a parent who themselves was not raised in a way that they can express their own emotions properly and tell their daughter or their son that they love them and show that they love them and be there, then, that creates an environment for that next child. So whether you were forced to kill in Africa or you simply felt unloved by a parent that was physically present, the damage can still be the same.
Yeah. I think it's called epigenetics, where you have your DNA is formed by the past experiences of your lineage, your ancestors. And even though you're not living with the trauma of whatever happened to my great grandfather in consciousness, woven into the fabric of your very existence is some remnants of that. I don't want to believe that has an influence on me, because I don't want to believe in external things having control or influence over me. But then I'm left with the question, it's not external, that's internal, because it's woven into my very existence, my DNA. But it's definitely an interesting topic to dive into. And I don't think we know enough about it yet, that's for sure.
Well, I think what's exciting is, with epigenetics, we're realizing that DNA can be changed now. Same with the brain health. They used to think that when it was dead, and now we know there's neuroplasticity. So I think that it's exciting, even if you've got this lineage of trauma or alcoholism, whatever the thing is, that you get to be the person that starts morphing the DNA so that it's different for your children.
Which is exactly how I end up going from being an 18-year-old drug abuser to joining the Marines a year later. Right? Because I created the thought, the vision, articulated it with clarity within my mind. And then I began to enact the behaviors that were associated with the emotions and the idea of who it was that I was trying to become. Therefore, creating that neuroplasticity within the brain, and then taking drastic action to move towards it. That's 100% true. You're right. That's very exciting to know that. And then if you can actually stay consistent with it, anything is truly possible.
So what was it that made you turn that corner?
My best friend John graduated Marine Corps boot camp without a doubt. He, we had the four J's: John, James, Joe, and Justin. I was by far the most erratic out of all of them, the most drug induced. They were not as bad as me for sure. But when John joined the Marine Corps, I got to go see his graduation in California. And right afterwards, I turned to his little brother. I couldn't believe it was my best friend, my literal brother, somebody who I had been through more, with more, a part of more things in my entire life than anybody else. And here he was, this like just different, new person. Opened up my mind to what might be out there. Turned to his little brother after we left the graduation that day, and I handed him two fresh packs of smokes. And he goes, "What are these for?" I said, "I'm going to join the Marines." And he was just kind of like, that's like the weirdest thing in the world for this guy to say to me, but sure, takes them, puts them in his pocket. And then 1 year to the day, I was walking across that same parade deck.
Beautiful. So how did you do as far as boot camp, with the background, like you said, of, initially sports, but then, the addiction side too? Did you build yourself up physically as well?
Oh, hell no, man. You can't recover that fast. I was 120 pounds when I went into boot camp. And they actually put me on something called double rations because you have to eat in literally 15 seconds in Marine Corps boot camp. That's not an exaggeration. Literally 15 seconds almost every single day of boot camp. And in order to keep me from losing so much more weight and being considered a below the medical threshold of healthy, they put me on double rations. I was just frail. I barely passed the running. I worked myself just to get past that bare minimum, and it took about a year to do so, to get clean from all the drugs, to stop smoking, to reshift my mindset. It just took an entire year of me doing that and kind of college, but mostly that to really get myself there to pass the minimums.
So where did you find yourself deployed initially?
I got stationed over in Okinawa, Japan, which was cool. It's like Japan's Hawaii. And then I went and did 3 Marine Expeditionary Units. So that's where you go on a ship. And during this time, of course, the Iraq War is at its height. And I started to really panic because I'm here in the Marine Corps. Everybody's going to war. I'm not going to war. I got to do some really amazing things. And I was very appreciative and present in those things. Countries I've been to, militaries that I worked with, exploring the Great Pacific, spending time on a Navy ship, which after about 2 days was more than enough. But able to get 9 months of that glorious duty. So then I made it back to the States, to California, volunteered to go to Afghanistan, and the Marine Corps told me no. I did a thing called Request Mass, where you file an official complaint, which technically gets it's Marine Corps policy and procedure that if somebody submits that, it goes to whomever it's written to, no matter what. So I wrote mine to the Commandant of the Marine Corps, literally the person in charge of the whole Marine Corps, and it didn't make it that far. I'll tell you that much right now. It only made it about 2 levels above my leadership, and I got yelled at a lot. And then a few weeks after that, though, they shipped my ass off to Afghanistan, and that was a good experience. Up in the north, 2010, very interesting time. And then came back. This part's a little significant. Before I left Afghanistan, I ran into a MARSOC team, Marine Special Operations Command, Marine Raiders. They had never been around before. This was like a new thing in the Marine Corps that got reignited in 2006 when Rumsfeld said, "You guys will now stand up a SOCOM, Special Operations Command entity." Force reconnaissance has always been around, but they were never a part of SOCOM. SOCOM capable, but they were always task directed by the Marine Corps. It's the Marine Corps' way of just, being the Marine Corps. So they stood that up. I run into this team, and I met this guy named Chris Antonik. Him and his buddy are just having a night themselves. They're doing their thing, but I'm kind of just sitting there having a conversation with them, and they're opening up to me what it is they're doing. And I was just floored. I thought it was super cool, and kind of why I joined the Marine Corps to begin with. And then the next day I went home to the States, and then 2 days later, I think it was 2 or 3 days later, he died. He stepped on a IED, was amputated basically up to the hip, was my understanding. So there was no extremity to really stop the bleed. I don't know if that's accurate or not. It's just kind of what I remember people telling me. And for some reason, that really bothered me. I don't know why. I didn't even know this guy other than that one conversation. So I got out of the Marine Corps for about a year and a half, 3 weeks after getting back from Afghanistan. I got back on July 4th, 2010, which was interesting. I got out 3 weeks later on the 23rd and spent the next year and a half going surfing, going to like paramedic school, living out of my car for about 6 months, driving across the country, just trying to regain and refocus myself. But man, I tell you what, I just really, something wasn't sitting right with me. So one random day I looked up the what's called MAR-Admin, Marine Corps Administrative Letters. And that day they opened up MARSOC tryouts to the inactive reserve members. So people who get out of the Marine Corps have 4 years of inactive reserve time that you don't do anything, but you're just technically in that category. That day they opened it up, tryouts, selection. So I figured out how to get myself in there. It was about a year-long process to get myself there. They kept telling me no the entire time. Finally, one day they called. They said, "Can you leave in like 2 weeks?" I said yes. And then I went to selection and I got selected. Went to the 9-month pipeline to become a MARSOC operator, and then ended up deploying subsequently back to Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and then Iraq another time.
What was it that allowed you to be successful in MARSOC selection when so many others rang the bell?
Dude, it's funny. I always wondered why. Like I thought I bombed it. And for those of you who don't know, and this is open source stuff, but selection for MARSOC is a very emotionless thing. So they talk to you like candidate XYZ. If you ask a question, they go, "What were your instructions?" You go, "Can you repeat the instructions?" They go, "Candidate XYZ." It's no feedback whatsoever. And I had a couple of bad days where I bombed, like day one, where my grip strength gave out on me within the first 10 minutes. And it was like a 5-6 hour thing where I was just the failure of the day. And then a few other times, one land nav day where I ended up like, I don't know, middle of nowhere, lost. When I went back, though, as a contractor some years later, I got to see my file, which is a pretty rare thing. A buddy of mine was a member of the cadre, and they keep it all pretty in-house. But he goes, "If you want to see your file, obviously I know you, so I could show it to you." And man, I got to say, I was pretty pumped at how I did perform in hindsight, because I didn't think that the things they were grading. And it's such a reflection of your moral character and your integrity, and they do a really good job at identifying that through the exercises and the challenges they put you through. And so I was pretty happy to see that the reasons why they did select me were because it was someone who had the right attributes for what they were looking for. So
I interviewed World War II veteran Frank Wright, who's one of the very original Marine Raiders. He was on Iwo Jima.
Yeah.
And he just got promoted. 100 years old, they promoted him. I forget which rank it is. I don't want to say the wrong one because I'm obviously not military and I'm clueless, but it was amazing. So 100-year-old, Marine got this kind of honorary promotion. And, he is such an incredible person because he wrote a book on PTSD. And that's unheard of from that generation. Firstly, for them to still be, alive, but secondly, to have that, again, courageous vulnerability to say, I'm going to talk about mental health at 90-something years old by that point. So, yeah.
Well, man, I gotta take a note on that, because it's got to be an interesting book.
Well, then, a question that I love to ask anyone who's been deployed in combat. The reason I ask this is when you are back at home, we get a very polarized view of war. Either kill them all, let God sort them out, stacking bodies, or they're all baby killers. And in the middle are the men and women that we send overseas with our flag on their shoulder to, protect the people of that country and obviously this nation as well. First part of the question, regardless of the politics that sent you over there, was there a moment where you realized that there were some horrific people that needed to be taken care of?
Absolutely. Absolutely, 100%. There's so much to say about that. The first realization up close and personal was actually the people we were working with in Afghanistan, raping little boys, called chai boys. It was explained to me that if you're a chai boy in life in Afghanistan sucks so bad that if you're a chai boy, you're doing pretty good. If you're a child who gets picked up by a local warlord or village elder and you get raped and put into house slavery for your entire childhood, you're doing pretty good, man. Like I'd be like, "Damn, James, like Abdul picked you up, bro. Congrats, man. Congrats. That's cool." Because when you develop manly features, then it becomes gay, and then they give you a daughter to marry and some cows and some land or something like that. So it's a very strange conflict because when we speak about cultural differences, this kid wants to be there in a sense, or is at least told that he wants to be there. I still can't let it sit right with me, and yet these are the people we're working with. And so, what do we do? Who really is the bad guy? Is it the Taliban, or is it these guys? I don't know. That was the first really big major confliction that I had when I was going overseas. The other was ISIS, without a doubt, 100%. Those people carried with them this just insanely I don't know if you believe in God or not. I do, and I don't know if I've ever felt demonic possession in my life. It was like I was a child fearing the monster in my closet. It was just something that was so cryptic and evil that I believe all of those. As much as I am sad for the fact that they're possessed by this evil entity, this power, this evil spirit power, whatever, they need to go. All of them need to go. There's no room for that in this world, in my opinion, because it's just so fucking horrible.
When you reflect back now, all the places that you served, were there any common denominators again, generational trauma that was creating such violent hatred in these men?
My, well, that's a great question. I haven't really thought about it. I'm sure that there is. I mean, life in the middle of the desert sucks. That's for sure. People in the States take these things for granted where you have safety and security. In most of the world, people can literally just come up to your house and hack your family to death in front of you and whatever, deal with it, kid. That's not a reality here in the United States. Sure, things happen and people are murdered innocently, but it's not as easily done as it is in the vast majority of these places. It's how ISIS got so big to begin with. They just went across the countryside slaughtering these little villages. It was insane. So I'm sure there is. I wouldn't doubt it. I'm sure that the last 20 years of the global war on terrorism didn't help that either. I'm sure that there's all sorts of contributing factors as to why somebody would become radicalized in the way that they are. You go back to, Wahhabi Islam extremism, which was created in the Saudi Arabia, nation, I don't know, like 1400s or something like that. I could be wrong on those dates, but it goes back quite a ways. And life is hard and it's painful. And if people have something they can direct that anger towards, then it's an opportunity to become radicalized, I think.
This is, I think, one of the things that's really starting to be glaring these days. I think the South Park guys had it right. That whole Team America World Police thing, it just creates more issues when we
Yeah.
start, going to other countries, and especially if we're going in the wrong way with the lack of education, which I've heard a lot of your peers say. Like when we went to Afghanistan, it was completely tribal. There was no country of Afghanistan, so
Yep.
everyone was set up for failure. And then obviously when you're there for a certain amount of time, what was originally seen as an ally becomes an enemy, and now you're breeding terrorists that way. But it seems like the converse actually would be far more effective, that we fix our own country and make it a place where people look overseas and go, man, they've got their shit together. And then
Yeah.
we permeate the culture out rather than force it on people.
I talk about this from time to time where I'm not a world police advocate. I think Truman post World War II created the military industrial complex through the decision, whether intentional or unintentional, through the decision of policing the world and building up these economies. If you look at Afghanistan, we crushed the Taliban in like a couple weeks. And then what do? Kind of left them to go to Pakistan. We went to Iraq, all for the purpose of just breaking it down and trying to build it back up again. But when you look at the lines that were drawn in post World War II Middle East, it's all made up by a bunch of foreigners, French and English and British and American people who have no idea of what's going on there. And then we try to enforce it. We're surprised when they fight each other. The resources are adequate enough, but yet scarce enough to where it's created its own internal conflicts. And it's just like, what are we doing? If I'm actually so ecstatic that they just changed it back to the Department of War, because that's what it is. Stop with the lies and the disillusion of, oh, we're doing this in the name of defense. No, we're doing these things in the name of war. These are acts of war that are now being fueled by the desire for certain companies to be making a bunch of money off of it. Converting nations to NATO means they have to convert their armament. I mean, there's so many trillions of dollars being made in this, and that ultimately was a huge reason why I ended up getting out. So I was just sick and tired of it. Sick and tired of going to funerals and seeing widows and fatherless children over this dumb shit. If we have an enemy and you send in the United States Marine Corps, special operations or not, send in the infantry and they will destroy it. Then you bring them home. Focus all those hundreds of billions, trillions of dollars on the first responding resources here within the United States. I think that that is where this is needed more than anything. Let's raise the standard of our police. Let's raise the standard of our firefighters. You know, let's raise the standard of the people who are literally saving the lives of the people we love. And then start to disperse it out further wherever it could be used. Imagine if we didn't spend trillions of dollars in Iraq the last 20 years. Like, what could that have done? It's we'll never know, but I'm a big believer in that for sure.
This is a conversation I've had with many people in the military, and it's a good comparison. A parallel is, you know, the nation's health. So we have 70+% of America is obese or overweight.
Crazy.
And that spans obviously decades. So we're talking left and right, over and over and over again. It's getting worse and worse and worse and worse. And when you have a profit-based disease care system, where are the checks and balances to make people healthy? There's no money in dead, and there's very little money in prevention at the moment, but there's a lot of money in sick, So if we keep our customers sick, and it's ironic, it's really no different to the pushes that you were dealing with when you were young and getting your drugs from then.
Yeah.
You know, first taste is free, you know what I mean? And then we got a patient for life, or, you know, an addict for life, depending on how you look at it. And I see the same with war. You know, the World War II generation, I mean, incredible. You know, that's the one that we really do hold up as like, okay, this is when you need to go to war. But in, you know, the last few decades, you look at the money that was made by weapons companies, uniforms companies, MRE companies, you know, all these companies that are rebuilding, air quotes, after a war, you know, trillions and trillions of dollars. Where are the checks and balances to stop sending our young men and women overseas in a war while these companies are making billions and billions and billions of dollars?
Yeah, I don't know if it ever stops, man. I think that you need major drastic change. I think that's a part of the reason why, without going too far into my own personal beliefs, I mean, I think that's the reason why people tried to kill Trump. I think that that's a big reason why anybody who talks bad about the military industrial complex, I mean, Boeing had like 3 whistleblowers killed. Well, what? You know, the whole Epstein thing, I think it's all interconnected at some point. That's just my own belief system. But based off what I've seen and what I know about Ukraine was never going to happen. The Minsk Accords were ready to be signed, and it was our administration that sent somebody over there to say, you're not going to sign this. You will convert to NATO because it's going to make us a lot of money. And if you guys go to war, guess what? It's going to make us a lot of money. Those are the only 2 choices you have. You look at Iraq, you look at Afghanistan, and it's just such a joke what that's all done and turned into. But I think once the writing is on the wall and somebody who has a bit of integrity has the opportunity to close out that open check, close out that door of income, well, what do? Is they just completely redivert and create a new conflict. And man, that's just one of the biggest downfalls, you know, to the last since 2000 is like, what's going to happen here now? I hope that we see an end in it, and I only think that we can if we have successful business leaders and combat veterans in our government in the United States. And I think right now we see the largest demographic of businessmen and combat experienced veterans in our government, which is what I think we need to keep in order to maintain this shift in foreign policy. And hopefully, this whole Ukraine thing does stop soon. Hopefully, the Israeli thing does stop soon. But if you've ever heard of the Ben Gurion Canal, I don't think it will until that's completed. That's just, again, my own personal belief systems. But it's a bitch, that's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I've had people on the show that are supposed to be massive diplomats, that I was hoping we're going to get in, and they get in, and then they're just turning their head at what's going on in Gaza, and tens of thousands of children, and it doesn't matter. You're not taking sides when you say, okay, this has gone too far. Like, all these children are being killed, and this is what I think we need. We need moral courage. That's the real prerequisite. People that are going to stand up and say this is wrong. It's that simple. There's so many holy books out there that share the same common denominator. It's pretty fucking obvious what is a good deed and what is a bad deed. And I think that's what we really need is a system that chooses real leaders again. We've got this system where you can be president if you just take enough handouts from companies. They'll get you there. Here's the puppet strings. All right, let's go. As a nation, we've lost the fact that we are the taxpayer, that they are our employees, not our dictators. And if we can go back to a system where you truly allow real leaders to rise through a system, they don't have to have billions of dollars and they can have ethics, then I think we're going to see that. But what's beautiful is I'm seeing the chinks in the armor now, these cracks. The average person is seeing the bullshit from both sides. And I think, just as you alluded to, the real, morally courageous veterans' voices, that's what we do need to hear. The men and women that went to war, they're the ones we need to listen to, not the flag-waving politician that sends those children and none of his own family ever served.
Yeah. And I do also want to say first responders too, man. I think we need first responders more than combat veterans. I think, at least in my mind, I line this up to where local politics, local governance, which I think is the most important, needs to be just saturated and flooded with all of our first responders, because you guys are the ones who are just dealing with the worst of the worst day in, day out. You see the policies, the procedures that need to be changed, the fiscal budgets, all that stuff, this actual streets of the cities that we're living in, and the problems that are persistent in it. You guys, all you do is live in the problems. And then when you look at it like a foreign or like a federal government perspective, that's where I really start to see like a lot of the veteran influence. Not to say they can't be intermingled or interchanged, I think they should be, but the fact that we have the experience overseas and the life experiences between both of those demographics, when you see a dead child, it's like, what the freaking hell are we doing? And also are strong enough physically and mentally and emotionally, capable through their morality, like you said, to just say, no, this is insane. And it needs to definitely stop. I think that's how we make some seriously drastic change for sure.
I've said this, and I'm actually in the process of making my latest book into a TV show. And the reason being, you don't have your Jocko Willink or, insert whoever, a well-known military member from police or fire or EMS. You just don't. And yet you think about what is the rawest view of society. It's those professions. We're the ones that see, is this system working? Is this system broken?
Yeah.
And so I think they are absolutely voices that we need to hear. And I'm hoping that this show is going to really get people kind of questioning some of the things that firefighters just sit around the station petting a Dalmatian and waiting to get a cat out of a tree. No, they're working 24 hours a day, getting forced in shift over shift over shift. And those frequent flyers that you alluded to are the desperation that we have in this country, one of the most affluent countries in the world. The homelessness, the addiction, the sex work, the gang membership. There are root causes for all of these, and they are reversible, but not if you just, again, wave a flag and, take your left or your right stance and fix absolutely nothing.
Yeah, I'll just kind of also add this in really quickly, because I think this is super important, is the personification of what a politician is supposed to be. Imagine this. You can convince an entire nation, a population of the most powerful nation in the world, that in order to be one of its leaders, in order to be one of your leaders, the person who's going to lead you has to exemplify these characteristics, this persona, this demographic. And if they don't, guess what? They're not a good quality candidate for that. When I look at the personification of what a political person is, they are the easiest person to blackmail on the world in the world. They're the easiest person to find dirt on. Why? Because they're supposed to be this clean cut, no past history, drugs, alcohol, anger, issue, no, just everything so perfect. Yale, Harvard University grad. Why would we want that to be the personification of the person who represents the vast majority of the demographic of our nation when that's not us? And on top of that, they're easy to blackmail because when I do a search history on them through, Pegasus or some sort of remote technologically advanced thing, when I put some detection on them for a little while, I quickly observe all the things that they keep secret from society. And now I could easily manipulate and blackmail them into doing exactly what I want them to do. You know who I do want to represent me? I want it to be somebody who's been through some shit, who's honest about it, who's not proud of it, but uses it as a means and a tool for positive change in their life and in the lives of the people around them. And they're not perfect, and they're not going to be perfect, and they're always going to struggle with being a human being. But you know what? They are who they say they are, and they do what they say they do, and they can't be blackmailed. And what's interesting is that's actually one of the attributes looked for in the special operations teams and the intelligence community, like the CIA and stuff, is can you be blackmailed? Are you who you say you are? Do you live with raw authenticity? I've known guys who are buying hookers and doing blow and saying all this stuff on their forums. They got selected because they don't do it anymore. They made a life change and they're open about it. Versus the guy who slept with one prostitute 10 years ago and he's all secretive about it. Even though he's a stud, they drop him because he's easy to be influenced and manipulated. And I think that that's just really important to say. I want my first responders and military people to be representing the majority of the country for sure.
It's so funny you say that because I couldn't agree more. And I've always said this, that we have an illusion in the fire service that they want choir boys to put on the uniform.
Hell no, I don't want choir boys running into a burning building to save my child when I'm out of town off work. No, not at all. Sorry.
No, you're good. But it's funny. My very first application I put in, it was Miami Beach, and it was kind of like you do a test and it goes out to all these different departments. And I was honest about some stuff I'd done in Japan. Some was legal when I was over there. Some was illegal. Just drugs that ironically now we know are very, very effective for PTSD, by the way. Had a time of my life, to watch Planet of the Apes, and everyone was a monkey when the lights came up, and danced a lot, hugged a lot of Japanese people, and was honest. And he screwed it up and threw it in my face. And I was like, oh, so you got to lie to be a firefighter.
Yeah,
and man. I lied my way through 3 polygraphs. And again, I'm not saying this is not something to brag about. It's embarrassing that that's what has to be done. But This is the facade. And then you add on that mental health conversation. If we're not talking about the shit that we've been through before we put on the Marine uniform, the firefighter uniform, then we're missing a huge piece of the first responder or military member mental health puzzle. The fact that you say I will serve when 90 whatever percent of the country doesn't, there's a reason for that. And you take that trauma, and if you work through it and you bring it out to the front and you acknowledge it at the front door of the Marines or the fire service, and you say, hey, we're going to help you work through that at the same time as you're doing PT and weapons training and, taking doors, because we understand that that's going to become an asset. It is going to be a strength, but you can't bury it down. Otherwise it will fracture your foundation. So whether it's the president of the United States or a firefighter or a Marine, it's the same exact conversation.
And I mean, when we start talking about this stuff too, it never ceases to amaze me. I just did the 7-day trek with the All-American Leadership Group and Knowles up in Wyoming. 7 days, strangers, no cell phones. Very diverse group of perspectives. But when you start talking with people and you're not distracted by your technology, mobile devices, you have a lot more in common than you ever could have imagined. And I don't know if there's a human being on this earth that I've ever come into contact with that I've gotten to know a little bit where I wasn't able to find something that we had in common. And only makes me wonder how much more we would all have in common if for whatever reason we weren't ashamed of the things that we've done and talked about them more openly.
100%. That's actually a good segue. I mentioned earlier it was a 2-part question as far as when you've been in combat. The other side that we don't hear on the news is the kindness and compassion by our men and women in uniform. So when you reflect back on your career, whether it was your own men, in this case, men and women, whether it was some of the indigenous people you were working to protect or working alongside, what are moments of kindness and compassion that really resonate with you?
I'm sure there's a lot of examples that I'm just not thinking of, but the first thing that comes to my mind is the food, the meals. They're always bringing us food and tea and meals and tea and lots of tea, but I liked it. I didn't mind it. Um, they don't have a lot, man. I eat spam every day for 30 some days straight. I'll never eat it again. It's absolutely disgusting. All my Hawaiian brothers and sisters, power to you. I could not do it. But that I remember I was so pissed off, like day like 4 of eating spam all day, and spam on like a tortilla roll type of bread they had out there. And I was like, this is bullshit. This is like 3 meals a day, one little spam roll. I was starting to get really upset. But then I was watching all the guerrilla fighters, and I realized that they actually weren't getting as big of rolls as we were. They were having to split theirs in half and share them with somebody. And we had like a full roll of shitty spam. And that just, man, that's a big deal to me. Food, water, you don't have any, and yet you still bother to give something to somebody. That's a real testament to somebody's faith in God and life and the abundance of the universe. Pretty cool.
Absolutely. It's amazing all the different stories I've heard. And a lot of it is that, the hospitality. And obviously I guess an extreme example is that lone survivor story. When you hear
Yep.
about what the Afghan, men and women of that village did and the risk they took, harboring him. I mean, that I don't think had enough airtime when it came to the actual film. But when you read the book, I mean, he talks about it in detail. But this is that shared humanity. You remove the flag, you remove the uniform. Most of the people, like you said, there was some that have so far gone as far as the hatred, but that shared humanity, wherever people have been, serving around the world in whatever time period, you hear that over and over and over again, because most of the people that are in combat are not the ones that started the war in the first place.
I mean, I don't even think I know of a single instance where a soldier started a war.
No, exactly. Well, speaking of that, then you kind of hit on it before. What made you pull the trigger on your transition, and then how was that initially? Because that can obviously be very jarring. You've got this identity, you've got this purpose, you've got this tribe, and then one day, you walk out the door for the last time.
Yeah, and it really is a you walk out the door for the last time because you get I forget what they call it, unread or read out of all the secret security programs and stuff, and you can't step foot in there anymore. Your badge gets revoked. Um, it was kind of twofold. So one was I'd gotten in trouble at sniper school. The most benign action turned into this just insanely extreme disciplinary action that was just unheard of in the history of probably the Marine Corps. I got promoted to a certain rank. I didn't want the other students to sit through a promotion ceremony. So just like I had many times before, I put the rank on after I had been officially ordained. And then one of the instructors was like, "Who promoted you? You need a ceremony." And I was like, I lied, which was so weird. It was just such a weird thing for me to lie about. I was like, oh, this guy down the street did. And then they investigated it, which is even weirder. It's just like this series of just really uncanny actions and events. They found out, they threw me out of the school. I lost my element. I was one of the more senior guys in the entire battalion at this point. I mean, I just had a really illustrious career when you look at it on paper. I mean, it was what is going on? Get back to my command. They had all changed out because we rotate so often. There's only so many of us, and they just hammered me. They took my rank away. They even took a second rank away, but they put me on probation for that, which I got to keep. Kind of cool side note, I was the most senior sergeant in the entire Marine Corps by like a lot of years. I'll just say that. I was like number one sergeant for like 2 years. And it was just really strange, but that ruined my career. It was just so weird. And then um, ended up being a very even more strange thing is that the element that I was in charge of, they ended up getting on an aircraft that crashed and everybody died. And so the guy who replaced me was on that. It was just a really strange time shortly thereafter. So now I'm dealing with like that, and I'm getting kicked out. But then the final, no matter what like happened, internally, morally, I was done when we got told, after we kicked ISIS out of Mosul, Tel Afar, Hawija, the last three cities, pushed them all the way back into Syria. The Iraqi government turned their weapons on the Kurdish people because the Kurds had fought for the land the Iraqis abandoned. And now the Kurds basically owned this oil rich lot of land called Kirkuk. And the Iraqis said, hey, you're going to give that back to us. And the Kurds were like, no, we're not, because we fought and bled for this. So we're just going to keep it. But the United States government supported one Iraqi government, not a Kurdish government. We got told to abandon our friendly positions with the Kurds. We get back to the command center. I'm looking at the screen for the UAV feed. And there's an M1 Abrams tank, a U.S. M1 Abrams tank, supposedly from the Iraqi military, with a picture of the Iranian Ayatollah on the front of it. Because we knew the Iranian Quds force were deeply integrated into the Shia portion of the Iraqi military, but yet we did nothing about it. Just one of the strange red tape restrictions. And then it lit up that Kurdish position with a tank round. I think it killed one, wounded another. And then one of the Kurdish guys had a German anti-tank rocket, fired it at the tank, hit it, set it up in flames, which was kind of cool to watch. It's not often you get to see effective weaponry against a U.S. M1 Abrams tank, although I'm sure it was like the shitty Charlie model, whatever. But still, it's pretty cool to see it be effective. And it's just like, what are we doing? You know, what is this for? This is just stupid. And I was done.
The number of people I had on the show that have obviously seen a lot of horrible stuff, whether it's in the military, first responders, and yet, aside from, as we've already touched on, childhood trauma and that element, one of the most crushing areas is actually organizational betrayal. Like having this tribe, believing in this whole mission, wearing a certain flag on your shoulder, and then one day they turn their back on you. And if you think about, ancient tribes, if you were ostracized by that tribe, that meant death. You're not hunting together, you're not gathering together, and you don't have that community anymore. And I hear this over and over and over again, whether it's a police officer that did everything right and his department threw him under the bus, or whether it's like you're saying, a nation's military that are fighting for a certain cause, and then they turn around, all of a sudden the rules have changed again.
Yeah. It's important to realize, and this took me a while, and it's kind of hard. It's strange. When you do something like that type of a job, when you do something like a first responder, whether it's police, medic, nurse, doctor, whatever, but especially I can speak from my own experience as being in the military, and we had lost so many guys. Death became a real thing for U.S. forces to me in my time in MARSOC. It never really was previous because I had never experienced that up close. But to see guys dying, to go into their funerals, it just became like it's almost like you lose a piece of your soul because you're writing the check and you're throwing it into the wind. And the question is somebody at an unknown time going to pick that thing up, and at an unknown time and place go into the bank, and at an unknown time and place to you cash that, and then all of a sudden you get withdrawn? And to put that out there, it literally takes a piece of your soul with it. It has to, because that's the only way that it puts you into the mindset and the frame of being the person capable of detaching and doing what is required to make it through whatever situations it is that you're being confronted with. And when you do that, it becomes your identity. I am a Marine. I am a MARSOC Marine. I am a Marine Raider. It is who I am. It's not what I do. I live it and I breathe it. And perhaps to, some degree, there will always be some truth to that, but I struggle with that a lot because I had no purpose anymore in life. And that's ultimately why I became very close, I'd say half a pound of trigger pressure away from blowing my brains out all over the place on many occasions. I would fall asleep with a gun in my mouth. I don't know why. It never went off. It didn't. But to realize that you can evolve into something more and still have a piece of that fabric inside of you, I think is really important, because it doesn't have to define you and who you are. You ultimately define who you are from the inside out. And if you define yourself as police, firefighter, medic, military, and then you lose that and you choose to not grow beyond it, then you're going to have a very difficult time and you'll probably end up killing yourself. That's why I think a lot of guys do it.
What I've realized, and it was funny because I just did this 9/11 tribute competition, like a fitness competition fundraiser on Saturday, and I had to wear my helmet for one of the events. And I was telling my wife it's so weird because I advocate for this profession, but it's been 7 years since I wore the uniform now, and I almost forget that I did it once. And I think again that's because there's been a healthy transition, not immediately, but after a few years. But one of the big things for me was realizing, well, it was the mission that never changed. I wanted to make sure that I was there on people's worst day. I wanted to make the world a little bit better. And what I wore and what I carried was just, an outfit and equipment, but that wasn't who I was. I was proud to wear a firefighter's uniform. But I think, what you're doing now, what I'm doing now, are very different, but you're still continuing the mission. You're still trying to be the force multiplier now to maintain this lifelong goal of being the protector and trying to improve the things that are broken in the world. And I think when you can separate that from the actual uniform itself and be proud of your service, but realize that it hasn't ended when you hang it up, I found that very healing.
That's really cool. I never really thought of it in those terms before, but it's very true because even when I was bouncing around for the first couple of years after I got out, overseas contracting, which was not, I wasn't like running a shooter job. It was more intel based, but even still, like not my identity, right? A little bit, but not so much. Doing corporate work and trying to consult corporations for violence prevention programs, security programs. I would talk about my background, but I didn't feel like I was who I thought that I was anymore. And then when I really started focusing in on training people how to use firearms for the greater good and how to develop a positive mindset in a world that's full of negativity and scarcity, to be there for people and help them, empower them through those types of challenges in life and potentially the worst day of their life. Yeah, it's all about the mission. And I think that's a pretty cool realization and something that I could probably also take with me to preach more regularly to when I talk to guys and girls. Like, look, you're going to get out and do real estate. If you really want to do that, cool. But are you nervous about that? Are you going to fear the loss of the camaraderie, X, Y, and Z? Because it's probably the mission, and maybe that'll kind of spread itself out. So thanks for that insight.
Well, that's what I found, a lot of people that had that healthy transition, if they went to, let's say, a financial company that was just focused on money, a lot of times it wouldn't be fulfilling. But if they were able to find, in the corporate space or wherever they went to next, an area where they still were improving the world, even if they say they became a personal trainer. All right, well, I'm making people healthier. I'm stopping them from ending up in an ambulance or an ER. I think that's where you see that really kind of not flawless, but that through line continue. But if you find yourself in a very self-serving, money-focused, business, maybe, just maybe, that's not the right fit for a first responder or a military member.
Yeah, or the combination of both, right? Like you could all, and this is actually bringing up a pretty interesting point too, is that a lot of veterans that I talk to when they get out, I had this epitome where when I was starting to shift my mindset, my belief systems from this depressed guy who's going to off himself to neuroplasticity, using the brain, quantum physics, affirmations, daily lifestyle, habit development, all that stuff, all the stuff I've been trained on in my life and have done multiple times before, just never really had a name to it. I started to consciously and intentionally put it to work and use in my life. And that's when things really dramatically started to flip in terms of the life script. And I'm driving around looking at all these multi-million-dollar homes one day, and I was like, there's millionaires in every single one of these houses, thousands of them. How many Marine Raiders are there? Have there ever been? Why am I not a multimillionaire? It's like, what is going on? How am I failing at that game and struggling while everybody else in all these homes are clearly not? What do they possess that I don't? And it was just a different set of knowledge. It's just a different way, a belief system, really more than anything, is they believe they could. And I'd always been raised to believe that that's not a thing. I've heard my dad laugh 2 times in my life. Once he was watching a TV show. The second time was just a couple years ago when I was talking about my business to somebody off on the side. He overheard what I was saying in terms of like finances, and he laughed out loud across the dinner table, which I thought was pretty interesting. But the majority of millionaires in this country, and maybe I'm wrong on the stat nowadays, somebody can always correct it, but there's a very heavy percentage of multimillionaires that are veterans and former first responder peoples. And I think that if you find your mission and you find your purpose and you find your niche and how to implement it, and then you just focus on serving that constituency as much and as hard as you possibly can, then there's really limitless possibilities. It's not a job that you're going in just for the empty purpose of, well, I want to make money. But you could definitely do both, where you're driven, you're making the impact, you're formulating your plans, you're bringing people in for a mastermind alliance, you continue to grow, you continue to scale, and then anything is really possible. And that comes from the organizational development, the discipline, the habits, the lifestyle of people who are in those highly demanding jobs and positions. And it's like, fuck, man, if you would have just not killed yourself and given yourself a couple of more years, if you would have just had more faith in yourself and your own abilities, how different life could be for those who are listening right now, or could have been for the people who killed themselves. I look back in my life and I'd be so pissed off if I would have killed myself over those reasons. What a stupid waste of life and the abundance of beauty that I have now within it all. It's just so inconceivable that was even me at some point in time. And I just encourage people to keep moving, because anything in this life is possible. Just lose the negative self default beliefs and you could really change and shift your paradigm for sure.
After all these conversations I've had, and so many have been there, right at the point of suicide, and some of them went through with it and they survived, and that's why they're on the show. There's a few, elements that we hear a lot about. Oh, I wanted the pain to end, I was depressed, blah, blah, blah. But I think the old school way of talking about suicide is still viewed as selfish and cowardly, and how could they, and think of your family. But then you hear hundreds of people tell their stories. And there's another piece that you hardly ever hear. Now, it's mentioned in, like the psychologists, psychiatrists, they understand this piece, but on the regular conversations, it's not. When you have this perfect storm of all these contributing factors that get you to that point: unaddressed childhood trauma, sleep deprivation, CTE, side effects of alcohol, psych meds, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that person is now at that point, the brain is literally miswired. So we talk about neuroplasticity. The brain is really shifted to a form of psychosis, if you look at it, where the reality is distorted now. And over and over and over again, I keep hearing people say, I felt like I was a burden to the people that I loved. And if I just removed myself, they would be happier. Now, it makes no sense to the healthy brain. In that reality, it makes perfect sense to them at that moment, which, when we talk about the people we lost to suicide, that would make that act at that moment courageous and selfless, because there was a belief that they were the issue. When you think back now, when you were there with that pistol, was that little voice whispering in your ear the same way?
It's interesting that you bring that up. I just wrote something about this less than a week ago. And it was a veteran who made a post about a commander of his who had killed himself, and how he just wishes that he would have reached out. Like, why didn't you? My response back, coming from a place of love, I wasn't trying to be like, because of this, right? But to be like, look, nobody who is on the verge of suicide is ever going to reach out, because they already feel like they are a burden. That's why they never do. That's why you don't get somebody calling and saying, I'm really just thinking about killing myself. No, it's so far beyond that in terms of emotional turmoil. And what I honestly think is demonic possession at this point. I look back and I could remember some things. I was just like, I feel like I was possessed. Why would I even bother? Everybody hates me. All I do is complicate people's lives. I'm not a good person. I don't do good things. And people don't understand that, just like when you physically perform something 10,000 times, let's say, it becomes a habit. It becomes ingrained in the subconscious portion of your brain, because conscious thought requires a lot of calories. Your brain burns more calories than any other part of your entire body or organ per pound of body weight. It's a caloric burning house. And in order to conserve those calories, it solidifies that neural network, sheathes it in some good thick myelin, and then substitutes it down into the subconscious part of the brain. It says, yo, you go there, no longer think about this, just do it. Your thoughts are the exact same thing. And it's twice as difficult to change your thought habits because we always have a negative default disposition based off survival mechanisms built in our brain. Our brain's number one priority: don't die. Don't die. That's it. Whether that's regression from pain, conservation of calories, which is, again, another reason why it programs into the subconscious so effectively. Don't die. And so, are good memories associated with death? No. Bad experiences associated with death, bad memories associated with death. So we always go there first, twice as fast to the amygdala than the conscious part of the brain, the neocortex. The way information travels in through the senses, it goes to the amygdala 2 times faster than the logical part of your existence. So that's why we're emotional creatures. We always respond to things emotionally. Why am I going to make this whole thing worse for everybody else? My amygdala is already firing off. I'm already doing bad things. I'm already reinforcing this default negative disposition belief system in myself. I've solidified the habits by becoming highly emotional, because when you're highly emotional, it solidifies that neural network at a much greater rate of speed. But this is all bad. This is all bad reinforcement, which causes you to build momentum and to spiral completely so far out of control that you don't even recognize who you are anymore. And that's when you lose your identity. That's when you lose your purpose in its entirety. And I honestly think that that is the moment when people do it, when people kill themselves, is through a loss of purpose and a loss of identity. We could talk about that with active shooters in schools some other time if you want, because that in itself is like a 3-hour conversation of what we're doing to little kids these days and making them lose their identity. But I'll digress to, you're not going to burden the people whom you love, and you already feel so guilty over hurting. And you probably have done some bad things. You probably have. Probably done some fucked up stuff. I was telling this woman, and I'm not this. It's almost like this dichotomy of people nowadays who do bad things just so they can then talk about it later to be like, oh, look, I'm reformed. This isn't the life that I've lived. It's not anything remotely proud of. It's like I cheated on a woman who I was dating who was a widow while she was laying wreaths on her dead husband's grave for a ceremony. I was out sleeping with some other chick. Like, that's a really fucked up thing to do to somebody. That's a bad thing. And so those are the types of experiences, and everybody has their own version of that. I wish that was the only thing that I've done to people that I love. But we let that then build up and compound, and then going back to the drug addiction and the shame, how I felt so shameful that people could see right through me, that people could see right through my soul. And they knew I was lying about everything. And they knew I was not the person who I claimed to be. That there was just such a massive dissonance between who I am made to be in this world and who I actually am, that it was just like the most, like, what am I doing? Like, why am I wasting this space on this planet? There's a million people who could take my spot and be better than me. So why would I ever bother laying that out on anybody else even further? Because they already know. And they probably don't give a fuck, which obviously isn't true to some degree for a lot of people. But that's what I gotta say about that.
But it's so important. This is what we need to hear front and center, is this feeling of burden conversation. Because you, again, let's go back to, you and me when we were young, and then you go through our childhood and things happen, and now we're drawn into uniform. There is this trauma, there are these mistakes, there are these things that we're guilty about, there are these things that we're ashamed of doing. And then, you start struggling, and now we pour this guilt and shame on through our messaging, like it's cowardly, it's selfish, etc., etc. And now, that's compounding even more. Now think of your family. I am thinking of my fucking family. That's why I'm going to take myself out so they'll be happy again, because, in that mind, that makes sense at that moment. But I think, taking them, pulling them back by getting them to understand that burdensome conversation. And ironically, I just had a friend call me yesterday, and I'd had that conversation with him, and it had actually reframed, he'd seen the fucking voices in his own head, and it pulled him back, thank God. But then you've got to get people to understand that, there are reasons for their behavior too. Now there are victims, and, so there's a You know, you have to own your mistakes, of course, but you are also a product of your environment, and people are going to look back and they're going to have done some things that they're not proud of. But those have happened, and it is what it is. But understanding that you were brought up in a certain environment that created your behavior, whether you're in Afghanistan or whether you're in the UK or the US. And when we get people to understand that they can heal, you can turn this around, and you identify the things that set you up for failure and then own your own mistakes, you can then move forward, like we said, and stop those damn dominoes from falling. But if our messaging is about adding guilt and shame to people that are fucking drowning in guilt and shame, and then we're surprised when we lose so many people, it's because we're sending the wrong message in the first place.
Yeah. I I had this realization after the, without a doubt, the closest night to blow my brains out. I had this realization that this was not going to work. This way of living, and how did I get here? How in the world did I get here? And just by chance, I was going through the traumatic brain injury clinic program as I was getting forced out of the Marine Corps, and I just decided to listen. And I'll never forget, Doc Johnson the neuroscientist comes in, explains the symptoms I'm having, and I was like, "You read my medical record, big fucking deal, man. What's your point?" And I was just so jaded. I literally said that to a full bird captain in the Navy, and he looks at me and he goes, "I didn't even open your medical record yet. It's right here." He throws it on the table. He goes, "I haven't even looked at anything except your MRIs, my brain scans." He had my attention. And then he started explaining to me how he could identify those symptoms based off of the calcium deposits and the thickening of the axonal nerves and all this nerd stuff that I could talk about for days, because it just has changed my life. And I said, I'm gonna see if there's some truth behind this before I just kill myself. And then I did, and things started to change. And we go up and down, left and right, of course, but the universe is always going to challenge you as you're getting ready for a new set of problems. You know, and if you learn the lessons from the previous set, there will always be another set. You know, life isn't about bliss, in my opinion. It's about being able to develop the skills, tools, resources to overcome the next set of challenges. And for all the bad that we just talked about, I want to just reiterate that your brain could be used for the exact same thing in the positive, and you could just be the most amazing being that you could possibly imagine. And I honestly think that's who we're designed to be, the greatest version of what we could potentially be within our own minds, because everything was started in the mind first. And if you picture yourself as the most loving, kind, compassionate, strong, fast, superhero human being possible, you could do it. You could absolutely 100% do it by changing your thought patterns, your thought processes, these habits, the neuroplasticity, putting emotion behind it, doing it daily, remaining consistent and being persistent and overcoming the challenges, and accepting self-reflection. But I will say this, the number one thing for my epiphany, I said, when do I behave this way? I'm talking, I was smashing. I had 3 pieces of furniture in my apartment. I put holes in the walls, ripped doors off the frames, threw my guns up against smashing them against the brick wall, just trying to break my gun. I was just fucking erratic. When do I get this way? Oh, that's when I drink. Well, when do I drink, and why do I drink? Well, it's at nighttime, when there's nothing to do, and the demons really start to come out. How do I avoid that? Well, I've got some sleeping pills here, so maybe I'll develop a nighttime routine. And I'd come home, lights would be dimmed, they wouldn't go beyond a certain brightness. I would drink nothing but chamomile tea, pop a sleeping pill, do a little bit of schoolwork for a positive reinforcement, a little bit of momentum, a little bit of a gain, a little bit of a win. And then I'd wake up at 3 a.m. and the demons weren't there and the world was still quiet. But I felt productive versus destructive. And by changing that part of my physical environment, it's so important to anybody who may be struggling and want to make these crazy life changes, is you have to identify and just mercilessly eradicate every negative thing that influences you throughout your day. The sweets, the cakes, the drugs, the alcohol, the prescription meds, you got to fucking flush it all. Otherwise, good luck, man. Good luck, because that's the type of drastic action it takes to really change your life and to flip it around like that. Unfortunately, emotion comes from Greek. It's emotus, energy and motion. Everything is energy in the universe. We get put into motion when we become emotional about something, which that wasn't the case, but it just is. You got to hit rock bottom, I guess.
What's interesting with the head trauma conversation, the fire service specifically in EMS, we don't have that much exposure to it. The regular law enforcement don't. It's usually more the SWAT guys that are breaching and that kind of profession. But what we do have is sleep deprivation. And at the moment, there's a massive, recruitment crisis. So our first responders are being worked into the ground. I mean, the average firefighter work week is 56 hours a week. Mandatory overtime is another 24. So with one overtime force, that's 80 hours. That's double what a civilian works. Awake four nights of that week. And when we wonder why we're having the same issue, then you go home, you drink to unwind, as you said, that disturbs your sleep. Now you've got another one. So these, identifying these, and I've been fighting tooth and nail to change the firefighter work week nationally to get it to where we can perform at a high level and not die. But touching on what you said as well, I think where the mental health conversation needs to be, I mean, the red flag with the burden, absolutely, but then the focus needs to be on post-traumatic growth. Like there is an incredible version of you waiting on the other side of whatever that unique toolbox is that you got to assemble and that work that you got to do. You're not going to be the 18-year-old, Joe or James. You're going to be this new version, but you are going to have more resilience. You genuinely are, more compassion, more empathy, because you've been through that fucking, meat grinder and come out the other end. So putting hope into the other side, you're not going to be walking around looking all mopey with your therapy dog. That means you haven't done enough work, and again, not shaming anyone that's there. And, there are those anomalies that just cannot get past that point. But I think even like the psychedelics and some of these other areas might be the missing piece with that as well. But you hear, yourself and so many people that be on the show, they're a better version of themselves now. And they've identified some of the things that were breaking them down, and they fixed it. The same way as when I hurt my back as a firefighter and I used movement to heal it, the near career-ending injury ended up becoming a strength. And like I said, I just did that fitness competition yesterday at 51, and competed against all the young guys because I refused to do the masters of division. So this is the point when you can see what the issues are. Then you can fix it, which is exciting. So rather than the doom and gloom messaging, we got to talk about you 2.0 and how exciting that is, and that that will drive you to actually get there then.
Yeah. I love talking about post-traumatic growth. I hate when people ask me if I have PTSD. I'm like, I don't identify. I don't even like when people say, somebody said, "Oh man, you're in recovery." Like that's crazy. I was like, no, I'm not in recovery. That part of me doesn't even exist anymore. In fact, I have to look up pictures and evidence of my past actually even existing, because it feels like I'm lying when I talk about it, because it's just so insanely opposite of who I currently am. But to what you said about identifying the problems, it's so hard to do, because when we think about experiences in life that generate an emotional influx within us, our body brain doesn't know the difference between imagining or actually living in it. And so it's going to produce the same hormones, the same neurochemicals associated with that experience. So if it was a bad experience and you start to think about it, you're like, man, how can I get over this? Well, that then generates the emotions associated with that event. And now you're living in the past. That feedback loop cycle is not going to do anything positive for you whatsoever. You need to be capable of disassociating your emotions from the experience in order to truly, objectively review it. And this actually happened to me by accident. I had taken a bunch of acid, like LSD, and a bunch of Molly, and it was really, really pure stuff. This was in my time after I had gotten out of the Marine Corps. And my best friend had just died, and it was just an absolute shit show of a time. And my buddy and I had taken all these drugs. It was the 4th of July, and we're sitting underneath the bridge. So it was James and Joe out of the J crew. And the amount of pain that I was living in, just true emotional turmoil, survivor's guilt from the plane crash, survivor's guilt for my best friend who saved me and I couldn't save him, all sorts of other loss of identity. when I was getting scared, that as I started to think about those things underneath this childhood hangout spot where we still got writings on the I beams that run underneath the bridge, like 20 some years later, writings from when we were kids. I started to feel myself drifting into a potential bad trip experience. But the combination of the drugs that I had taken were influencing enough dopamine and serotonin flooding to where I could actually not feel emotionally influenced by thinking about these things. It was almost as if I took them out of my brain, put them down on a book, and was reading a story about somebody where I was like, yeah, that seems pretty sad. That's a difficult thing to go through. But I wasn't like, my heart's just being crushed and my bones are being gnashed and I'm just, sick to the stomach with the amount of pain I was living with. And I was so shocked at how controlled I was that I started to actually dive further into the things that I was going through and experiencing in life at that point in time. And when the night was over and I woke up the next day, I was looking back and I was just really stunned by that. And I realized this is why things like, I've never done ketamine therapy, but supposedly that helps out people a lot. Things like ayahuasca, which I have done, 5-MeO DMT, which I will be doing pretty soon here, just to have that experience as well. Your ability to objectively review the sequence of events immediately creates new neural connections in the brain that circumnavigate the resonance of trauma with that memory, therefore allowing you to permanently view that experience objectively without inciting that emotional evocation within you that causes you so much pain. And that's important because that's literal neuroplasticity in action. And then the influx of neurochemical hormones that are being stimulated in your body through the use of these hallucinogens or drugs is enough to solidify that neural connection circumnavigating the association and the tether to the trauma. That's like that's such a medical phenomenon. I wouldn't have believed it if I didn't know what I know about neuroscience now, that I was taught living it, going through it, and that experience that I had that night underneath the bridge on the 4th of July with my buddy James, just opening up and diving into all the things that I would never be able to talk about like that. And I think it's important to recognize because I know women who've been raped, sexually assaulted, and I work with a lot of these people right now in firearms training, helping them regain that sense of self. So that way they feel confidence and they don't fall back into the regression of the emotional pain associated with the trauma. I'm not handing out drugs to people. We're doing training and self-empowerment through, daily actions and stuff, but it's all the same concept is how can you objectively analyze what happened, what you're going through without eliciting the emotional response, and then empowering yourself or using that information in which you extrapolate to live a more positive and impactful life in society.
I mentioned earlier about getting the application thrown in my face because of the drugs. It was the mushrooms were illegal in Japan, so it was psilocybin, and then ecstasy was the one. It wasn't legal, but we were doing it and having a blast. But since then, now the full career in the fire service and in this podcast, those are having incredible effects. And I just had Dr. Ben Sessa from University of Bristol back on the show, and he's one of the real gurus when it comes to MDMA-led psychotherapy. And it makes perfect sense. You when you're on those drugs, it used to be kind of marriage counseling drug when it was first developed, it removes that emotional response. And so you're just able to be, vulnerable, truly vulnerable, and really explore these areas without having, as you said, this kind of fear response, shame response, whatever it is. And the success they've had, and it's not that you get prescribed it, you do it in-house and then you go home. I think it's like 2 weeks later and then 4 weeks later again. I think it's like a 6-week cycle. And then it just keeps, getting better and better and better and better. So this is why I think it's so important that people understand that toolbox doesn't consist of talk therapy and psych meds. And there are so many other areas, and everyone's going to be different. Someone might not want to do ibogaine. It might be too much. They don't want to purge or whatever the issue is. Someone else, that might be a last ditch attempt. I've heard so many of those, addiction especially. But understanding that there are so many areas that there's so many tools that you can use to find your own unique toolbox for you. And then that's going to evolve too. This worked, this year, and now year 2, I'm going to switch to some of these other things. that I think provides a huge amount of hope then.
I think as long as you just don't give up and you keep exploring new options, find things that work, that don't work, who cares? Like, what are you going to do? Just die anyways? Yeah. So you might as well give it the best shot that you have in order to help the people who rely on you. You know, I speak as a father, as a husband. I'm not doing anybody in this whole universe any good by feeling guilty over the fact that I survived certain things and other people died. I'm not doing anybody any good by drinking myself into a stupor, taking drugs to the point where I'm just erratic and blowing my brains out. None of that makes any sense. And if you really want to truly be selfless, based off what our society has as a standard of selfish, that's what you need to be, because you cannot give that which you do not possess. And as long as you constantly strive to be 1% better every single day, as long as you're constantly pushing yourself to be the greatest version of you, and you have to have clarity on that. Like, you can't just, oh, I want to be X, Y, and Z and ambiguous. You have to really think about it. Sit in the silence, which is very difficult. But once you do it, you know, get up at 3 a.m. and you don't have an urge to drink and there's nothing else to do. So what do? You just think and write. When you start to re-explore and open up those areas of you in your life, your impact, it can be truly endless, and your family needs you to do it. You need you to do it. Look after yourself so you can possess the things that will help them in their lives, and be somebody who they could talk about when you're in your grave, because it's going to happen. But be somebody that they will look back on and say, man, he was a fucking strong dude. She was a strong chick. They did everything that they could amidst all the challenges of life, which I'm now experiencing as, you know, their child or whatever. That's something to look up to. As long as you never stop, you can't fail.
100%. Well, I want to get to, you know, what you're doing now, but just before we do, how did you come across All American Leadership, and talk to me about your role with that company?
Yeah, so it was just a freak series of situations. Met a guy in Austin, Texas, who I met at a random winery that nobody was at, and a random trip my wife and I took when we were just at a very low point in our lives. And the guy comes up to us, talks to us. I thought he was a scam artist. He wasn't. We end up, you know, developing a relationship. He introduces me to some woman introduces me to some guy introduces me to Rob, who's the CEO and the founder of All American Leadership. And when you look at us on paper, Rob, Army officer, West Point grad, you know, just very successful guy on paper. You look at me, enlisted Marine, just, you know, troubled childhood, criminal, you know, tendencies, just complete opposite ends of the spectrum. And so, to be honest, when I was taking the meeting with him, I was kind of just like, I'll talk to somebody, but I didn't really look much forward to it. I didn't see anything coming out of it. And man, Rob and I just did a 13-hour drive last week with each other in the car, and we didn't stop talking for a single second. And it wasn't forced and it wasn't exhaustive. It was just learning so much about that guy and how we actually have so much in common, which just reinforces this idea that when people talk, we realize things about each other at such a rapid rate of speed that I'm convinced if everybody just talked to each other and didn't live in isolated worlds, there would probably be very limited violence, if any, because it develops that humanizing factor and rapport. But that's how I got introduced to All American Leadership. Rob and I talked for about a year, just on and off, touching in business stuff here and there, seeing if there's ways we can collaborate, because he has a very astute staff of West Point grads, Annapolis grads, multi-star generals, like major commanders, like astronaut people and people who train astronauts. And then I've never really saw myself as being a part of that staff because I don't fit the demographic. And in fact, Rob told me, he goes, I'm the only enlisted service member to ever serve in AAL, and I thought that was kind of cool. But we eventually one day said, you know what are we talking for? Like, let's just do something and see if we're going to jive together and work well, because I believed in what he was doing. And that's when we did, and I came on board, and I run their leadership in a word. Every month we have a 1-hour Zoom call. It gets pretty deep pretty fast because I'm very intentional about that. And I've done multiple universities and academies for them now, and just such an amazing group of people. I love listening to everybody talk because I get to learn so much, and it's a really cool experience. So that's how I got introduced to AAL. I do that multiple times throughout the year, like on a monthly basis for the online portion. And then Rick too. I mean, everybody I've talked to at AAL is just, man, really just, we develop a connection very fast because it's very accomplished people through life. Whatever that means to you, what it means to me is that they're very accomplished, very intelligent, different varying perspectives, and they keep me sharp and honest. So that's that part. And then I run a company called JM Training out here in Chicago, where we teach people how to use firearms for the greater good. We want to train 4% of the population so we can have a positive impact, or at least see if we have a positive impact on violence and violent crime. And we do that through firearms training. We run a private outdoor facility right outside of the city where we do defensive shooting and tactics. You can't do it anywhere else in the entire area, like a 2.5 to maybe even 6 hour drive. I don't know of another gun range that lets people draw from the holster, do multiple shots on target, shoot, move, communicate on the range. And we've got over 400 members now in the last 14 months that are a part of this thing. So there's a huge need for it. You know, we'll train you, we'll equip you, we'll educate you, but most of all, we'll plug you into the community. And the community has just been amazing. Again, super diverse group of people. Every race, like at 15 plus religions or something like that, aging from 20s to the 80s, different continents, people who've immigrated here. I mean, Republicans, Democrats, everybody's in the group. Everybody's in the group. And we all get along exceedingly well. And we talk about whatever. There's no limitation or restrictions on what you can or cannot talk about. In fact, I encourage people to have conversations that create points of contention, points of conflict. The only caveat, the only thing that the only standard is that it has to have a means to an end. What's your point and purpose in having this conversation? You know, is there a point you're trying to make? And as long as there's a point you're trying to make, even if you guys don't agree with it at the end, cool. At least now we understand where that perspective is coming from, because that person's no more than a collection of their past experiences than you are. And so it's really cool, man. It's been really awesome. And yeah, I don't know how we'll get the data on crime stats. Maybe in the next 4 years, you know, if we hit 4%, we'll see a decrease in trend. But at a minimum, we're just trying to help people out as best we can, prevent them from being murdered or raped or something like that.
We just had that horrendous stabbing, which I've seen people post that it was only reported on one side or not the other. But you know, that poor Ukrainian woman that was stabbed on the train in Charlotte, North Carolina. I mean, I don't think there was any weapons training that could have avoided that. I mean, the poor woman was just sitting in a seat, but it illustrates the dangers that are out there, you know. And again, that circles around to the mental health crisis that we've been talking about for 2 hours.
Yeah, it's, man, and there's so much more. Like if you talk about the civilian population, so much more to even say about all that. You know, the thing about people on the streets that I learned when I was running around on them, a lot of them are mentally insane because they're alone but surrounded by people all the time, and they go crazy pretty quick. Then the drugs, the alcohol also induce that as well. You know, if anybody was asked to ask me a question like what could have been done in that situation, it seemed like it was a pretty open train. I would just never sit in front of anybody who is on, for me at least, based off my experiences. If you're on a train and you have like a hood up over your head, which I think maybe this person did in this case,
Yeah.
they're sitting there laying like, that's a person who's overly comfortable on that public transportation for me, and I'm probably not going to sit down right in front of them. I mean, I'm armchair quarterbacking. I'm not saying this woman did anything wrong. She didn't. She's just an innocent soul. Very sad. But if somebody was to ask what could have been done, I would just say, well, you know, maybe don't sit in front of people who happen to resonate with you in a certain way. I'm not going to break down all the ways I go through this process. There's three things: anomalous behavior being one of them. And so, yeah, heartbreaking.
My wife is an optometrist, and I actually went and got my eyes checked the other day, and someone walked in and they had just a strange gait, a strange way about them. They were older, they weren't physically intimidating, and they ended up, when I was having my eyes checked, causing a scene in that particular place and kind of, you know, storming out. And it's interesting, you know, again, not that I've been at war, not that I'm a law enforcement officer, neither, but, you know, obviously as a firefighter on the streets, you know, dealing with a lot of people that are desperate, you know, and there are some of those telltale signs. And like you said, in that particular case with the Ukrainian woman, you know, was that avoidable? You know, I mean, aside from, as you mentioned, just randomly not sitting there, probably not. But it's amazing with body language how you can see people that potentially are, just a little off, and then you trust that your gut as well. But I mean, if you haven't been surrounded with those kind of people in the first place, you haven't really got that baseline to go off.
Yeah, which is one of the downfalls of American society is we're so spoiled. We're so spoiled we don't recognize it, and it's a good thing but a bad thing, double-edged sword, I guess.
Absolutely. Now, I know you mentioned it could be a 3-hour conversation, but just, one more question at you with this kind of firearm background, obviously your military service as well. If you're king for a day, what would we do as far as our schools to try and reduce the number of horrendous shooting incidents that we're seeing at the moment?
Yeah, that's a very easy question that I've talked to hundreds of schools across the entire nation about, and none of them have taken my advice. It's not like I don't know what I'm talking about, but yeah, that can go on for a long time. First thing is identity issues. So let kids be kids. They're not chopping their nuts off. They're not taking hormone blockers in the third grade. They're not a chick. They're not a dude if they're not genetically born that way. Stop confusing little kids. It's already hard enough to be a child. I've known plenty of transsexuals in my life. Almost all of them have killed themselves. All of them have been horribly depressed, still are, and then a few actually completely regretted what they did to themselves after a handful of years. So that's the first thing, is stop messing with this gender identity stuff with little kids. 2, get rid of safe spaces. Teach kids how to deal with playground bullies. I'm not saying let kids go around and beat the crap out of little kids and stuff, but you at least need to take a step back and wait after the first punch or 2 are thrown. Like, kids have to learn how to deal with adversity, how to deal with disappointment and shame and guilt and embarrassment in themselves. And then they need to learn how to fix that and then overcome it and seek mentors and guidance from people like their parents, for example, or other mentors that they look up to. Because if you don't teach those kids how to deal with adversity and you teach them it's okay to express themselves however they want, whenever they want, but when they become an adult, then they go to their job, they get yelled at, then they go get a gun, and then they shoot everybody up, whether that's at the workplace or at the school because they're 16 and they got a hold of a gun. And they spent their whole life being told, you have no identity, you have no purpose, and it's okay to lash out however you want to lash out. And then lastly would be the emergency procedures for schools. I think they're insane. I think they are the absolute dumbest thing in the world. When there's a threat inside of the building and nobody's been able to explain to me this. Nobody. I've spoken to thousands of people about this in public settings, etc. When the threat is inside the building, why do we tell kids to sit still? Over 90% of all kids killed in school shootings are on the first floor. Over 90%. Over 80% of people killed in all active shooter situations are attempting to hide. Those are insane numbers and statistics. 90+%. Now, I'll admit, this is all self-founded research. When I studied all the active shooter incidents, like 117 of them from like the 90s up until 2017 or 18 or 19 or something like that. A few anomalies exist where you're either killed within 35 meters, or almost everybody's killed within 35 meters of the shooter. So those are 3 things right there that tell me, okay, well, if the threat's inside the building, why don't we hit an alarm, have a window installed where the teacher and the students can exit out the first floor, where they go to one of 4 pre-designated rally locations within 100 yards of the school, terrain dependent. So that way the teachers, the staff, they could see students who are getting lost or confused or scared, and they could rally them towards those pre-designated rally locations. And then guess what? The school's vacated. The only person in there is the threat. And then the cops show up and then they shoot them, or they shoot themselves usually. If you're on the second floor, fire escape ladders. Why is this so hard? We've had thousands of fires across the nation in our schools, yet we've had 0 fatalities every year. Why? It's because we build fire-resistant materials. Why can't we use aesthetically pleasing bullet-resistant materials? We can. It's out there. Instead of turning our schools into prisons, they could be aesthetically pleasing construction materials. And then 2, the way that we run fire drills, the way we run active shooter drills is so, again, mind-blowing to me. Fake blanks and throwing staplers or fake staplers at a shooter. What idiot throws a stapler at a gunman? This is what we're teaching kids and teachers. And I can't tell you hundreds of teachers have come up to me after these events that I'm talking at, and they'll be like, I keep a sledgehammer in my bottom right dress door. One keeps an axe, like to smash the windows that don't open because the school windows don't open. And we spend hundreds of billions of dollars on these school infrastructure projects and programs. Why can't we just replace one window per classroom? Well, if we sit down and we lock down and we all sit on this side of the classroom, Marjorie Stoneman stoked my interest in this when 14 out of the 17 people were killed in the classroom hiding in place, like what, on the first floor, on the first floor. So I would get rid of this gender ideology stuff that confuses the hell out of kids. I would allow a little bit of playground adversity and get rid of safe spaces simultaneously, just so that way they could deal with some struggle and learn how to overcome that adversity. I would change the emergency operations procedures that we have for our schools, and then I would change the way that we train on them. And then lastly, I'm a big fan of a concealed carry security program. I really am. You're never going to convince me that we protect our politicians with guns, that we protect our money with guns, and we don't protect our children. In fact, every day my kid goes to school, I'm sitting here like, why am I even? Why it? I got to change it. I have to homeschool my kid. I'm not going to continue to send him to this thing, and it makes me sick to my stomach every day that I do because of these absolutely ridiculous policies and procedures. And that's what I do. So that was a very long-winded answer, but it's something that I have spoken a lot about in the past, and I quite frankly have stopped because it's crazy. Nobody wants to listen to that.
I actually got to experience a code red with my son. I took him to a doctor's appointment, brought him back to the school, and literally as I'm signing him in, the doors closed behind me, and Mr. Gearing, you got to come, you got to stay, we got a code red. Now they've done, drills, but this is a bona fide code red. So we'd taken into kind of like the behind the office area where they had, photocopiers and, some other things. And I'm standing there, and obviously usually I'll be the guy on the outside responding in, a rescue or an engine. But I'm standing there with my child. And firstly, I remember him saying, "I'm so glad you're here with me, Daddy," which broke my heart because how many children didn't have mom or dad next to them that were cowering under a desk? But secondly, I just realized how vulnerable they were. The teachers didn't know what was going on, just the principal. These kids are all hiding in the dark, and I'm looking right at the front door, and there's a paper guillotine in there. I'm like, well, fuck, I'm just going to have to snap the blade off and, Geronimo, here we go, probably going to get shot in the process, but this is all we've got. And so just realizing, like you said, that complete disconnection between, what would be the appropriate response and what those teachers had the ability to even do. And, hearing, so many people that have been in some of these school shootings responded to it, and then you make a brilliant point that we protect politicians, we protect money with guns, but also Dave Grossman has been on a few times now, and listening to him pick apart all the different pieces. And this is what drives me crazy. And you alluded to this yourself. There are many, many areas that we've got to address simultaneously if we're going to fix this. Mental health, sleep deprivation from video games, operant conditioning from video games. The household that these children are growing up in, the bullying, all these areas. But what drives me crazy is this doesn't happen on most of the planet. But in America, we act like this is normal. So why are we not having the humility and going to Norway and Portugal and Sweden and Japan and be like, what are you doing that we're missing? And it's going to be exactly like you said, the mental health piece, all these areas. And then probably another one is investing in some of these schools that are struggling. We penalize schools when they struggle. A lot of other areas, in Scandinavia especially, they'll bolster those schools. So if there is a kind of missing piece at home, they'll fill that in the school. And the kids will be strong and tough, but they'll also have someone that they can confide in, that they can feel safe around, that maybe has given them a meal that day. So this is what I hate, is every single time these children are slaughtered, it becomes this political conversation of take all the guns or keep all the guns. And it does nothing for actually fixing the issue, which is let's take these 10, 12, 15 pieces and address each and every one of them so we can fix this issue.
Yeah, if we would have done that from the start, we'd probably have a resolution by now.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, I want to go to some closing questions quickly, be mindful of your time. The first one I love to ask, is there a book or are there books that you love to recommend? It can be related to our discussion today or completely unrelated.
I'd say Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, or the Science of Getting Rich, which I forget what that guy's authors was, but things about the subconscious mind really resonate heavy with me, because if you think you can or you can't, you're correct.
What about films and documentaries?
Man, I'm just like a big Animal Planet, outer space guy. I don't really watch too many films or documentaries, but Tony Robbins, I'm not your guru, I thought was very uh, opening, eyes, heart, mind. I thought Tony Robbins was a joke. Then I watched that video and I was like, what the shit am I watching? And it was pretty powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, speaking of people, is there a person you'd recommend to come on this podcast as a guest to speak to the first responders, military, and associated professions of the world?
Yeah, there are some people who have some pretty good momentum right now that do a lot of first responder work. I don't. Cody and I worked at the same unit at the same time. We didn't really know each other personally though, but Cody Alford is doing a lot of good stuff these days. I see him on social media. Um, Beyond the Barracks is a nonprofit out in Cali. They're doing some pretty good work as well. If you reach out to them, then there's again, I don't know this guy very well. Jimmy Watson. Oh yeah, and then the Squadcast podcast dudes. Brent Tucker, he's a former Delta Force guy, and man, I feel like a dick because I can't remember the other dude's name right now, but he's a former Army infantry dude, and I think a cop as well. Squadcast is the name of their show, and I think all those guys would be really great for you to converse with. I actually think the Squadcast guys I think are in Florida too. So
Okay, I have to look that up. Thank you. All right. Well, the last question before we make sure everyone knows where to find you and your training. What do you do to decompress?
I don't know if I do right now. Uh, with trying to like grow the business and having two small boys and a wife and a house, and really just in this phase of growth where we're at right now. What's funny is helping people just brings me relief. I don't know if that constitutes decompression, but I just love the progress of the business and of the work, because I've spent so many years just being in net negative. Now that we're like in a net positive growth state, it's just like a high to keep that train moving forward. So I'd like to do more skydiving, something that I told my wife I want to get back into again. And the hiking was amazing without the phone. But just being with the family at the end of the day when I'm here, is knowing that I've grown the company and helped it be more successful by helping other people. That to me is just like the ultimate. I don't need anything else.
Brilliant. I think my wife and I have both put a lot of work in the last few years, and I think that's the thing, is sometimes you have to postpone the decompression a little bit while you're in that growth phase, and then hopefully the other end of that will be actually a lot more time to decompress and spend time with family.
For sure.
All right. Well, for people listening, firstly, talk to me about the spectrum of training that you offer, and then let's talk about where people can find you online and social media.
One-stop shop for everything defensive and tactics based, man. We work with people who've never touched a gun, to people who've been shooting for a while, to law enforcement, SWAT, military. Like, I mean, you could literally get it all in over where we're at. Defensive shooting and tactics, sell you the guns, the firearms, help you make right purchases, be a part of great people. I mean, it's a one-stop siloed shop, and we even provide free self-defense insurance coverage through the USCCA. So anybody who trains with me automatically gets all of their USCCA membership paid for free. And that comes from my own experiences and believing that those guys by far have the best product out there and the best service possible. And it's like my lawyer could be your lawyer, and it's all covered. All costs are covered if you're ever involved in an incident. So that's like the program that we've developed. And then you could find that at joemalonetraining.com or Instagram, Facebook, Joe Malone Training, things like that, where I'm pretty active, and you can just give us a call and find our number and contact info and stuff.
Brilliant. Well, Joe, I want to thank you so much. I mean, obviously talking about some of the areas that we have. Some of the tangents have been amazing, but I'm in awe of people that truly have the courage to be vulnerable, and this is, the storytelling, I think, that's honestly gonna save lives. And I know sometimes that involves revisiting some of the more raw moments in people, but I think the force multiplying effect of really resonating with people is this courageous vulnerability. So I want to thank you not only for that, but also for being so generous with your time and coming on the Behind the Shield podcast today.
Dude, keep doing it, man. I have no doubt that you've made a lot of positive impacts in this world, and I just look forward to seeing it grow.